This week on Behind the Pulpit, Bible nerds, get ready, because this one's for you. Pastor Bob and Pastor Dave dive into the inner workings of the Gospel of Luke as they discuss Pastor Bob's opening sermon of our new series.
We thought we'd talk a little bit about the synoptic issues, some more in-depth understanding of the dating of Luke. You wanted to hear a little bit more about the stuff about Theophilus, and then I thought we'd kind of wrap up by talking a little bit about the Intertestamental Period, this 400 years of silence.
With that, we have a Luke-centered theology sprint. We talk about Elon Musk, and we answer one of your questions that opens up discussion on a difficult topic.
It was a recent article, November 22nd, that came out on the Gospel Coalition website called, "I Love My Transgender Child, period. I Love Jesus More, period."
As always, wherever you may be watching or listening to this today, we hope you're having a wonderful day. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's edition of Behind the Pulpit.
All right, well, hey there. Welcome to Behind the Pulpit for December the 5th, 2023. It is hard to believe we are in December. It is our first Behind the Pulpit in the month of December. Pastor Dave, are you excited about December Behind the Pulpit?
Here come the holidays. It's going to be a wonderful season, and, it's the most wonderful time of the year.
I know. It's a little chilly, a little nippy outside now, right?
Seriously.
I see you've been wearing that Dallas jacket. You have to put on an overcoat.
Got the heat pumping. I'm enjoying the heated seats in my car. I'm fully on working on the fireplace at home, having a little fire time at night.
Do a little kindling. You got the poker in there and making sure the fire is turning over.
Not the poker. My wife got me fire gloves for Christmas, so
what about,
I get right in there with my hands.
Oh, you really?
It's awesome.
It's like sticking your hand into an oven.
You just grab a log that's on fire and you just move it around.
Oh.
It is so fun.
And there's the title for the episode. Just grab a log that's on fire. That's great. That's great. All right. Well, before we dive into the announcements, let's talk a little bit about this last weekend. I heard you had some issues. Tim's back behind the camera over there. He was climbing mountains this weekend. How does it feel to actually have oxygen now, Tim, now that you're back on the East Coast?
Honestly, I didn't really have any. I didn't experience the breathing problems. I did go on. My fiance and I did go. We didn't climb it, but we took the train up to the top of Pikes Peak. I did get a little woozy up there.
Well, no, it wouldn't be breathing problems. It would be I'm like what you're describing. That's the you get up top and all of a sudden like, oh my goodness, I got a headache.
I got that on 14,000 feet in the air. But base
especially if you were driving a car up or you took the train and then all of a sudden you step out and you're like, oh, so here's a little thin up here.
Yeah, we got up there and I was like, oh, I feel good. And then I stood up and walked out of the train. And aside from the wind chill being minus 27 up there, I did get a little headache. But I had one of those donuts that they have up there, and they
got donuts on the top of Pikes Peak.
Yeah, they're world famous. They were pretty good. I wouldn't call them world famous donut quality wise.
Did you happen to have Bojo's pizza when you were out there? The mountain pizza?
I did not have any pizza. I think I saw it though.
Oh, it's delicious. You put honey on the crust. It's if you ever go back, you got to go to Bojo's.
Noted.
Can I tell a funny story here at the beginning? Here, just you made me think about it. So when I first moved to Colorado to go to seminary, I got to be friends with some folks that were out there, and one of the things they wanted me to do within like the first month and a half of me being out there was go and hike a 14er. That's like the thing you do in Colorado. So Pikes Peak, over 14,000 feet. I didn't do that one. We did a different one that was closer to Denver. That was supposed to be an easier hike. And you have to go at like 6 a.m. because you have to get to the top before like all the thunderstorms in the afternoon roll in. Are you familiar with this? Or
not the storms. I mean, I've done some skiing in Colorado, but I don't know about the stormy stuff.
All right. So anyway, I was hiking up, and they always tell you got to drink more water because there's less oxygen, you'll dry out.
Sickness.
So I had this like jug, this big. I think I've told this in a sermon. This big old jug, with me. I'm climbing up to the mountain, and I got about halfway up, and I just felt like I was going to throw up because of the not used to the oxygen stuff. So I had to turn around and go on back down. And what I always remember is I'm coming back down, and there's all these people that are walking up, and they're like, "Oh my goodness, you summited already!"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "That's right, man."
You just lied through your teeth.
I thought it'd be funny.
Well,
they didn't know.
Just to give you some encouragement, I got so sick after a day of skiing in Colorado that I was just on my knees, not able to walk from the ski lodge back to the car. Actually, if Julie's watching this, Julie remembers, it was just so embarrassing. I was not strong enough to carry my skis and poles back to turn them in. That's how ill I was after a round of Colorado skiing.
Oh,
man.
my goodness.
I'm used to the Poconos. Oh, my goodness. That's a different level over there.
Well, I will say,
Drink water.
I will say famously, the only time I ever skied was in Colorado, and I didn't make it down. I had to come down on a snowmobile. It was pretty intimidating.
Okay. Well, water.
There you go. Water.
Drink more
Tim,
water.
If you ever go back to Colorado, drink more water.
We drank a ton of it on the way up on the train.
I'm sure you did. Hey, the only other thing I wanted to mention this weekend. Actually, this one, and then you guys troubles over there. My birthday was last week, and my wife, I want to give her a shout out. Very sweet. She took me out to Seasons 52, which is our go-to place. Which you been to Seasons 52?
It's a regular pastoral lunch occasion for me. It's like
delicious.
kind of like a hub. Everybody can get there in like 15 minutes. So
well,
I'll meet you over at Seasons 52.
There you go.
Right there.
I love it because they know how to give you the exact right portion to make you feel full but not stuffed.
Yeah, that's a good observation.
That's what I would give. All right. Yeah. Anyway, she gave me this. This was my card. This is my birthday card. The Superman pulling the opening up, and then telling me that I am the Superman for the family. So
see, I thought you were a Marvel guy. You're
you know what? I'm not happy with Marvel right now. So maybe DC will have a better thing. Marvel's going in some directions I can't go in. So we'll end it at Endgame and call it that.
This summer I watched The Flash when I was on sabbatical. So I was kind of
the TV show or the movie.
Well, I watched the TV show.
The TV show's
great.
Good. TV show's good.
Yeah.
The movie,
I didn't watch the movie because they didn't use the same actor as the TV show.
Different.
Yeah,
totally
Ezra
different
Miller.
guy.
He's weird. All right. So, and now you guys are having some car issues, right? I'm surprised you're even here today.
I'm here. I have to ride my bike some of these mornings.
So we had to
I
pray
have
to exorcise the demons from both Tim's car and your car.
Yeah.
There's some demons.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tim and I need some prayer and fasting for our vehicle
Pentecostals.
troubles. Tis the season for car problems, right, Tim?
Amen.
Yeah, we won't mention what brand of
Pray
car
for us.
you both have and should be avoided, maybe. All right. Anyway, let's dive into announcements today. What do we got on the agenda over there, Tim? What's coming up? Men's breakfast.
Hey, this is really important. This Saturday, guys, 8 a.m., we hope that you'll be here for some great food, some powerful testimonies, some worship time, and some fellowship with your band of brothers here at Millington Baptist Church. It's going to be an awesome men's breakfast. Mark your calendar. Get up. Grab your coffee. Come join us Saturday morning.
Awesome. What's next? What's on the agenda? Same day. Cookies for a cause. Hopefully you've baked some cookies at home. You brought them in. If not, I believe you can drop them off on Saturday. And if you want to come for the packing party, you can come Saturday morning from 9 to 10, right? 9 to 10, they're going to be packing it up.
Can also drop them off on Friday if you want to get ahead of the game. But
There you go.
This is the weekend.
Depends on how proactive you are.
Right.
Then we're going to send them off to one of our local partners, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
always a fun time each and every year.
Yeah. Bob would like to request chocolate chip.
That's right. Last week, chocolate chip cookies is the best cookie. I'm just going to say.
Oh,
All
so
right.
you lowered the bar. Last time it was the only cookie.
Forgot, yes. Well, the only cookie... All right. Okay. I have had other ones. Okay, what's next? Pastor Dave. Look at this. Look at that beautiful slide Mark made for us there. Hey, we're doing a series on the Gospel of Luke, and we are offering...
Not too crazy about the cover.
I forgot to bring mine down to show you what it was. I did watch that section.
Cover seems so lame.
Yeah, when I turned on the sermon, and Bob is just like dissing. It's like, yeah, mine is beautiful, but everyone else's, it's just the black one.
Okay,
and I'm like, wow.
For your next professional development, we're going to get you some sales training. That's not how you do it.
But it's okay. You get the discounted price, so you're good.
I did go back and watch it, and I laughed. I was like, "Oh, yeah, maybe that wasn't the." But anyway,
Very
I did find out
motivating.
later that the
Let
teens,
me go get mine.
the teens are getting the flowery cover stuff for free.
That's because we value the next generation here.
There
at
you go.
Millington
There you
Baptist
go.
Church.
So when you get older, come on, you're making a little bit of money. You gotta
Just go with
pay
the
for it.
plain black.
There you go. Anyway, all of them. The point is, all of them have the Bible inside, so you can take notes. You can write down prayers. So we thought that'd be a good tool for you. So make sure you go pick one of those up.
Bring it on Sundays and take notes on the messages, and you'll have a keepsake of 7 months worth of solid exposition of God's Word to keep on the shelf.
And then you can put it on your shelf, and you can go back and look at it for later on.
Yep. Yeah, next time you go back to Luke.
See what God's teaching you during the next 7 months. All right, and then Dave, you're excited about this next one here. We're going to be doing a little Advent devotional.
Hey, we're putting together a devotional for next Christmas, but in the meantime, this Christmas, we would like you to submit devotional entries. You can see the guidelines on our website, and if you have the gift of writing and you'd like to use your gift to bless others in the body of Christ here at Millington, submit your devotional to that webpage. We would love to, first of all, publish it right away this year on our Pastor's Table blog. And so we're collecting those and putting together a devotional for next Christmas. So now's your chance to get to typing, get to writing, and we'd love to hear from you. So check it out.
Very, very, very cool. All right. Do we have any other ones, or are we pretty much good there? Oh, end of the year giving. How could we forget that? Oh, my goodness. Hey, so if you missed our sermon a few weeks ago, we did go through the end of Nehemiah, but also we talked about some exciting vision stuff that we have for the coming year, and we're hoping that you will partner with us on that to help us make those become a reality. If you scan that code right there, it'll take you to the giving website, and you can see, or you can just go to our website and find it on the rotator. It'll tell you all about the specific initiatives we're planning for 2024 into the beginning of 2025. Lots of exciting things that are happening. What are you most excited about there, Dave?
I cannot wait for Contend 2025.
2025, Elisa Childers, she will be here.
But it's hard to choose. There's a lot of exciting
there's a lot of cool stuff. We got the EDGE program with Josiah Venture. We have the teens are going to the DR. We got some...
including a teen that lives with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
She's just mission. Hawaii, DR, right?
She's rebuilding in Maui. She's helping in DR. It's going to be a very exciting year for her. She's going off to college.
'Tis the season of life to travel everywhere and do mission trips.
A lot of exciting initiatives on the webpage. Check it out. Give generously. Prayerfully consider how God's calling you to give at the end of this year.
Very, very, very cool. All right. So that's what's coming up in the life of our church. Hopefully you'll join us on some of those things. All righty. So, Tim, I think we're at the point of our show where we talk about what's happening in the world and in the news. All right. So, there's always so many things to choose from in the news. One of the things that I noticed over the last few weeks, and maybe you happen to see this, and the reason I'm bringing this up is not the reason that you probably would find it if you're looking it up on the internet. So Elon Musk was at a summit recently. You all know who Elon Musk. I forgot to ask you to get a picture of Elon Musk out there, but most people know who Elon Musk is. Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, Twitter, now X, owns all those things. He's one of the richest guys in the world. But he always is like kind of stirring the pot a little bit recently, I feel like, Pastor Dave. He's a very interesting figure. So basically he was at this summit. I think it was the New York Times Deal Book Summit here in New York, and he's getting interviewed. And recently, a lot of advertisers were leaving X because of some comments that he made that were, I guess, anti-Semitic. I couldn't find the exact comments he made about that, and he apologized for that. But a lot of people thought that the reason the advertisers were leaving was for other things that he stood for, other things that he's doing. So he basically had some choice words for them, which if you go and you look up, you'll probably find those. But that's not why I'm bringing this up. Later in the interview, he was talking about some of the things companies are doing nowadays, the things that they're promoting, and these advertisers that were leaving. And he made this statement. He said, I am tired of people trying to look good while doing evil. And I think he said that emphatically, to look good while doing evil. And I thought that was kind of interesting, So he's commenting on some of the things people are standing for. And this is not a Christian guy, but he's tapping into a scriptural principle, even if he doesn't know it, through some common grace, I think, Pastor Dave. So I thought we could maybe talk a little bit about that scriptural principle and, why is it that Elon Musk is noticing that? So, What do you think? We can chat about that for a minute here.
Yeah, I mean, I
People
think
some stuff to chew on.
the term that maybe is common in our culture is virtue signaling. So it's the idea that
good.
I would like to look virtuous.
Yes, look virtuous.
Because appearance is very important. And behind that may or may not be actual substantive virtue or change that really I'm in.
This is good. This is good.
Invested
There is
in.
some. There are companies that do, I think, genuinely want to do things that are good for
Yes.
the common, the community. For example, I'll give a shout out. I don't know much about them, but they seem to be genuine. There's a new coffee shop in downtown Basking Ridge. Tim, did I tell you about this? The
You did.
Barrister.
I'm very excited to check it out.
Okay, so they go in there and they make a good cup of coffee for you. They only give you a couple places to sit, so it's not a great place to be for a while. But they're making the coffee, and then in the afternoon they roast their own beans there, and then they give some of those proceeds to help organizations, the high school, things like that. So that's not really what we're talking about. I think they're trying to put their money where their mouth is. But there's other companies that are jumping on certain bandwagons, certain social agendas, and that's the virtue signaling thing that we're talking about. They're trying to look good based on the eyes of the world and what is most popular today, while not evaluating those things necessarily ethically. And I think that's what Elon Musk was getting at. But the exact citation is Jesus, right? Jesus talks about
Isaiah the prophet.
Isaiah prophet. Okay.
Yeah, says, "Woe to those who call good evil and evil good." So I think both of those halves, we see that in the world today. So
Right.
what Elon Musk was accusing is you're actually doing evil, but you want to call this good.
Right.
You want to
Right.
pretend like what you're doing is good, but it's really evil. And he's getting tired of that, and he's calling it out and saying, don't blackmail me, and he's cursing at them and that kind of thing, right?
That's the basic gist of what happened.
Yeah.
But that specific line he said, I thought was really interesting. And he's an interesting figure because, like I said, not a Christian, really wealthy, and yet he seems to be tapping into some of these interesting ideas.
Yeah.
Common grace. Not all the time. I mean, he's a bit of a mess in some areas, but sometimes he kind of hits the nail on the head.
And that's the critique of the up and coming generation, Gen Z, that they are very concerned about feeling good and getting involved in these social causes, and their heart is for compassion, and their heart is for the underserviced or those that are marginalized, and that's a very good thing, and you shouldn't change that. That's a great characteristic of this generation. The Christian critique of that is, why are you doing that? Are you trusting in your own goodness and virtuosity, and is this virtue signaling a form of justification rather than looking to Christ for to make you virtuous? So that's I think we can maybe give a critique there.
Yeah, in other words, you would say it can be a form of works righteousness, and that because I did all these things, well, then I'm a good person,
right? And that makes me feel good to look like I'm doing these good causes. That's not actually a good path to go down to feel good.
Yeah.
The path to go down is the gospel. That's what Christmas
or
is about.
The critique of the companies that I think he's offering is you're wanting to look good and do these things that appear good because you think it'll make you more money. I always maybe the tangible example I always look at when you go into Starbucks, just to call out Starbucks for a second, they have that ethos water thing. So they always talk about how they're donating money all over these places. And I always ask the question, are they doing that because they really care about the poor and stuff? And maybe they do, I don't know. Or are they doing it because it's in vogue and to make money?
It's good business.
It's good. It's a good business practice.
Right.
Right.
So the opposite is true too, right? So woe to those who call evil good, but then Isaiah says, woe to those who call good evil. I actually think we're seeing more and more of this today, that the goodness that God proclaims, the ethics that God finds to be good, people are calling those things evil and doing that very overtly, doing that very publicly. Yeah. And that's kind of new in our day and age. So we're experiencing that.
Yeah, and you know what I also find interesting is that sometimes I'll see people go to a group that they agree with, and then they'll start shouting about things they disagree with outside of that group, and then people call them brave. I'm not sure how brave it is to go to a bunch of people that you agree with and get them riled up for your cause.
Yeah,
isn't it much more courageous to walk into a group that you don't agree with and still offer counterpoint.
Yeah.
So we can talk about some examples about that, but I think you bring up the right tenor there. So that, anyway, that's in the news. You can look up Elon Musk at the New York Times Deal Book Summit, I believe it was, and that was an interesting line. He said some other things, but that's a way of looking at what's going on culturally speaking. The Deal Book Summit, there it was. All right, so Tim, let's move on to the next segment. We did have a question the other week. Do you think we could circle back to that?
Yep. So we had a question. Those of you who may remember, and hopefully the person who asked the question, we answered your first question as a Theology Sprint last week, and we wanted to dive into your other question this week. So,
oh, here it is. Oh my goodness!
Would you like me to read that?
How about you read it, man? That's long.
Okay.
Clear my throat.
Yesterday, this would be a few weeks ago now, Pastor Bob spoke about following Christ on Thursday, Thanksgiving, and Nehemiah 13:25 was about anger affecting all of us. And then, what language are we teaching our kids? And Romans 1:18 talks about not suppressing the truth. On Thursday, there will be 7 adults. This is talking about their Thanksgiving celebration. 7 adults and 5 children under the age of 13. All the adults have professed faith in Jesus, and the children are all being taught the same. And one much older adult is coming as a woman this year, having transitioned from a man. Anger, confusion, you name it, it's going to be bigger than the turkey. Please give us all some wisdom, or maybe Jesus will rapture us all before Thursday.
All right. Well, there you have it, Pastor Dave. So that's a lot of stuff wrapped up in that question. Sorry we didn't get to it before Thanksgiving. If you see us, I'd be interested to know how Thanksgiving dinner went. But yeah, so there's I think one of the things that's a challenge with the church nowadays is that people have a heart to be compassionate. People have a heart to love others in the midst of their struggle, and we haven't learned to balance the grace and the truth as well as we probably could have. So I think there's a general push towards grace while negating the truth. And so, there was an interesting... do you want to mention the article now or the...
Yeah, sure.
We'll talk about the Rosario Butterfield
we'll link
thing.
to this in the YouTube, the show notes or the description. It was a recent article, November 22nd, that came out on the Gospel Coalition website called, I Love My Transgender Child, period. I love Jesus more, period. So both are true. The article actually gives some practical steps as to what that looks like. Now, the family member, in this case it wasn't a child, but the family member may not experience your position of truth, though it may be gracious, as loving. They may actually use the word hate, right? They may use that term and say, you're hating on me, you're a hater. That's really common today, right? That's a misunderstanding. Right. Jesus said that we are to love him more than our family. We are, in fact, in comparison to our commitment and love to him, our relationship to our family should actually feel like hate. That's what he said. So our commitment to Christ has to be first and foremost. And so we have to show our allegiance to him. And in so doing, here's the ironic thing. We are loving our family members by doing that. We're not loving people by accommodating, by affirming the things that God hates. That's not actually love, right? So 1 Corinthians 13 says, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. This is what love is. Though people may not experience that as love, though they may even call it hate, it is love according to the Bible. And this is our way of standing. That doesn't mean we can't have compassion, empathy, preserve the relationship. You don't have to talk about this every time you're together with this family member. There's lots of other things that you can find in common to talk about. But if there comes up in the conversation whether or not you're going to be affirming this lifestyle, this change, I think there's an opportunity there for you to graciously articulate your beliefs in love and just agree to disagree on that.
Yeah.
There's actually a really wonderful testimony about this that Pastor Bob has worked really hard to arrange for us. Can you tell us a little bit more about that coming up here in March?
Yeah. So Christopher Yuan is a speaker. There he is up there. He's got a background in wrestling with same-sex attraction. Not so much the gender identity thing from his personal story, but at this event, he is going to be talking about that in our evening session. So he lives in this world, ministers much more to folks that are wrestling with this. And so if this is something you are wrestling with, I would encourage you to come out for this event. Save the date for March the 24th. We'll be promoting it pretty heavily after the new year, but that is coming up at the end of the March. And this would be a great question to bring back up with him. How do you interact with folks? Now, I think the deeper, some of the other threads to the question this person is asking is, so I'm going, and I think they talked about, there's going to be children there. I don't know if your children was going to be there, and that's a hard thing. I think a lot of parents are wrestling with when and how do you introduce some of these ideas to your kids. We live in a fallen world, and it's just a reality that you're going to be seeing these things out there. But when do you introduce that and move the kids beyond some of that opening innocence of life? Now, I will say we did have another underground, if you remember, Pastor Dave, with Katie Faust about a year and a half ago. And in the midst of everything she was talking about, one thing I remember she said that I've actually thought is pretty good advice. She does as much as she can to kind of shield and protect her kids for the first 10 years of life. Like those first 10 years are super important to lay the foundation for what's to come. But then she said around, and it's not hard and fast, but around 10, 11 is when we start to talk about, well, you know what? We live in a world where not everybody agrees, and there's sin, and there's fallenness. And so I want you to hear about all the stuff from me. And then she starts to introduce these things in an age-appropriate way. So I found that to be a pretty good guideline on when do you introduce those things to your kids. If it's a family member, that's it's hard. It's hard. And so you have to make some decisions on certainly having debriefs afterwards if you choose to bring your child to the event. But I don't know, maybe you have to make some hard decisions about where do you go with your kids.
Yeah, it can be unnecessarily confusing to kids or grandkids who are not ready to process that. Hey, that's my grandpa or grandma, and I'm they're not able to fully have abstract conversations about morality. So there could be some wisdom in protecting children, but I like that kind of age 0 to 10. You're really in protection mode for a while. Basically, you got 3 choices with your kids, and my kids are all over 10, so they, it's all
right.
in
and
the
my
past
kids are all
for
under
me.
10, so
I was always of the perspective of you got 3 choices with this stuff. You can either be way too late, you could be way too early, or you could be right on time. Like those are the only 3 choices, right? I think none of us want to be too late. I think you're right. You want to get ahead of it. Katie Faust said, I want them to hear this from me. I think we would all acknowledge none of us is perfect, so it's really hard to get that perfectly right on time. So if we're going to err, we're going to err on the side of caution and share a little bit on the early side just to prepare our kids for what's coming. I think there's some wisdom in delaying. Age 10 sounds like a good guide.
Yeah. Well, maybe one more thing to say about this. So I think Dave was right. He said at the beginning, I think the call is to lovingly speak the truth and rest on God's word. But also, I think just about the movement in general. So I think there are legitimately people that wrestle with the gender identity and everything. And what I feel bad about is that I think it's another thing, going back to the Elon Musk comment, that's in vogue, that this is just people jump on the bandwagon and they may or may not be wrestling with this. And it creates confusion and hurt, I think, for people that are genuinely wrestling with this stuff that need really to be ministered to. So there is I think Mark Yarhouse called it the political activists that would come in that are just kind of, I'm jumping on this because this is the thing to do. And it creates a lot of problems. There is a moment, I think, to speak truthfully about things, maybe in a more forceful way, and there's a time to minister to folks well. But I don't know if you generally found that to be the case, that there's a movement and there's people that aren't doing this but are just confused about life in general, and there's people that are genuinely actually wrestling with some of this stuff because of the fall.
Right, and the movement has sort of hijacked what is
the narrative.
What is a genuinely psychological disorder. It's in the DSM-5, gender dysphoria, and they've sort of broadened that to multiplied it by 5 or 10 to say no, it's not this small. It's actually this big. There's a lot of people struggling with this.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of a bait and switch that's been going on in our culture. So, of course, we need to have compassion for those who are actually struggling psychologically and mentally. That doesn't mean that we need to buy the cultural narrative hook, line, and sinker and say that gender is just a fluid construct and it's a spectrum and everybody can just make these decisions. That's actually really damaging. Just Google detransition stories and people who've made regrettable decisions in their earlier years that are irreversible, and the damage is done. So I think maybe it's going to take a generation of fallout like that for us to really turn back towards a more of a measured approach. But in the meantime, I think we need to be speaking the truth in love.
Yeah, and I think I've heard some people say once the lawsuits come and money's involved, that's when things might change.
There you go.
You know?
Yeah.
And back to the Elon Musk thing, of course, he was specifically talking about Disney and Marvel and people that seem to be leaning into this narrative, and audiences are rejecting it. So. All right, so that's that was that question. Thank you so much for offering that. Hopefully what we offered here was helpful. It's obviously a large topic with some nuances involved with
But thank you for your question.
Yeah.
Please continue to ask questions on Behind the Pulpit. We love that. We want to hear from you, and we want to continue to answer those questions on the show.
Awesome. All right, Pastor Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you because now we're at the point where we're talking a little bit about the sermon. So...
All right,
some,
so we're
Inquisition questions you want to ask me about the sermon yesterday. I know we had talked about a few different topics here.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so we are starting a brand new sermon series. This last Sunday was the first Sunday, the kickoff Sunday of a series going through the Gospel of Luke called To Save the World, and it's going to come in segments or acts. This is Act 1, where we're talking about the infancy stories of the gospel. And this is a biographical work that covers, of course, the life of Christ, but it's also a theological work in that the gospels are not strictly biographies, but they are theological arguments meant to teach us something about God and something about his plan to save the world through his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, who's not just the Messiah for the Jews, but he is the Messiah for the entire world. So Pastor Bob kicked it off this past weekend. Thank you for your good exposition there, my friend. So tell us a little bit about what we were learning on week 1 of this series. Tell us about the theme. Tell us about what's the series going to be all about.
Yeah, so we kind of leaned into this was an introductory message for Luke as well as for Advent, and so I tried to lace in some Advent themes, which of course are prominent in Luke 1 and 2, but also to get into what the central one of the central themes of Luke is, and that was the idea that Luke 19:10, slide 6, if you want to show them this, Tim. Jesus meets Zacchaeus, the short guy who had to climb up in the tree, and he wanted to see Jesus. And Jesus invites himself to his house, and in Luke 19:10, we read this. Jesus basically gives a mission statement for why he's here, and he says, the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Luke 19:10, the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost, which is sort of where we started to get into this theme of to save the world. And Tim did a great job on the intro videos for that time, drawing out those themes for us for Advent and beyond. So we really talked a little bit about this idea.
That's very offensive, right? What if I don't think I'm lost? What if I don't really appreciate you insinuating that I need a savior, that I need to be found? Isn't that culturally not very respectful?
Well,
what are you implying?
Well, this comes back to this calling good evil and evil good, right? So, yes, there are some things that are going to be culturally offended. We don't want to hear about sin or lostness. But what's interesting about that, and we talked a little bit about this in the message, is that one of Luke's themes is that Jesus is constantly coming to people who are lost, but don't think they're lost or don't want to hear that they are lost. And I'm thinking specifically of another illustration we used, the rich young ruler. There's also very famously the elder brother in Luke 15 and others. But Jesus is constantly talking about that you're lost and you need to be found. But the problem is if you don't know you're lost, you're not seeking the help that you actually need. And at the end of the day, you might be a little bit like the rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16, crying out, or the sheep and the goats, and that's in Matthew rather than Luke. But so that was a major theme. We talked about what does lostness look like? What are some things that we lose We had a funny moment with phones. If you go here to slide number 9, we talked a little bit about some common items that are missing in action. Phones, remotes, car keys. What items do you lose the most, Pastor Dave, in your house? Car keys, shoes?
Earbuds.
Oh, that's not on the list here, but earbuds.
You know what? My wife and I have the same exact kind of earbud, and she takes like a little pink dot of nail polish, and she always marks her stuff. So like she has like a little pink dot on her earbuds, and the case, because she knows that Dave's going to lose it, and Dave's going to be like, wait a minute, is that mine? Did you take mine? She's like, no, I got a little pink dot. So yeah, I lose stuff.
Yeah.
Earbuds.
So the tension we tried to create at the beginning, I think for the series, is this. Slide 13. We seek to live in this never lost world, which is what you were getting at right now, Dave. That it's offensive, or I would also say it's disconcerting. Right? We don't like feeling like we're lost, and so we seek to live in this never lost world where we're distracted by technology, or we think. Because you can just Google stuff, everything is always at your fingertips, and so it creates this kind of counterfeit idea that we're actually found, or
secure,
that you're falsely secure. And so we talked a little bit about idols, the Tim Keller definition of that, and how those things mask our lostness and make us believe we're found, even though we're actually lost. So that was kind of the deeper concept that we got at the beginning, and then
those idols work.
They do.
Until they don't.
That's right. They do. Money, love, power, education. I mean, there's so many other things you can mention, but idols are what Tim Keller calls counterfeit gods that make you believe that they can save you, but in the end, they leave you lost. Or the image I kind of gave was, you wake up the next morning and you're feeling alone, and they're not calling or texting you unless they want something from you, which, may feel a little counterintuitive, but I think these false gods are using us, and dragging us down and away from the true Savior,
giving us a false sense of being found, a false sense of being secure, a false sense of not needing help or salvation, a sense of independence, a sense of control.
Yep. Slide 23. So this is the theme we were getting at here for the series. Jesus Christ came to save lost people who do not feel lost. And we're going to see that over and over and over again in the Gospel of Luke. So those are the main themes.
So the challenge here is not so much to get people saved. Challenge number 1 is to get people to feel like they actually are lost.
Yeah. Or you might have people that have been in the church their whole life, and actually may feel lost, Or you're walking through you might be a Christian, but you're walking through a season where you feel lost, you feel like God's distant. And part of that is that we're not fully surrendering, fully trusting Christ, even in our Christian walk. So I think those are the challenges that Luke's gonna keep bringing up. Structurally speaking, for the rest of the message, we did look at Luke 1:1-4, and we had kind of 3 movements that we looked at. So we talked about the narrative, we talked about the eyewitnesses, and then we talked about we need to surrender to certainty. So Luke kind of lets us know, I'm writing this gospel so that you could be certain that these things are true. And he's writing it for this guy, Theophilus. So I don't know, maybe we can dive into some of these geeky questions here. Since it was an introductory sermon, I got into it for a little bit. We talked about the dating and who Luke was and his structure and some of the major themes. So I don't necessarily need to rehash that. We have a list of things that, for background purposes, I think would be beneficial for our listeners to understand. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about the synoptic issues, some more in-depth understanding of the dating of Luke. You wanted to hear a little bit more about the stuff about Theophilus, and then I thought we'd kind of wrap up by talking a little bit about the Intertestamental Period, this 400 years of silence, and I think that'd be helpful because you'd have to it's good to understand exactly what the Jewish people went through during that time as they're waiting for Messiah to come after the walls of Jerusalem were built in Nehemiah and before you get to the birth of Jesus. So there's a couple very famous things that happen in that period. So you want to take the synoptic stuff?
Yeah, sure. Tim, I had sent you some extra slides on the synoptic problem. You want to throw the first one up there? So this is what New Testament scholars call the synoptic problem. The word synoptic just means viewed together. So syn means together, and optic, obviously, that's like a vision term. So viewed together. And so Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels because we view them together because John is so very different. But these three Gospels are very similar in their arrangement, in their style, and in their language. And they appear to display some kind of literary dependence, some kind of source dependence. So that's the synoptic problem. So there's parallel passages, like I think I have a slide for the parallel passage in Luke chapter 9 regarding the. What's my next slide here, Tim? Okay, so if you look at a parallel passage in all four Gospels, you'll see. Here's an example: the feeding of the 5,000. And that's one of the things that shows up in all four Gospels. And you see that there's some similarities in this story and the way that they tell it. And you also see that there's some differences in this story. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke share 50% of the same Greek words. Other passages that they agree on share 90% of the words. Compared to John, who's very different, he only shares 10% of the same words in his Gospel. The other sort of confusing thing is Jesus probably spoke in Aramaic, and these were translated into Greek. And some of these Greek phrases are exactly the same as they put them forth in the Gospels. And then we have agreement in parenthetical material. So if the Gospel writers use a parenthesis or a bracket to break off the narrative and explain something, they explain that thing at the same time and for the same purpose. And so that's why people say there must be some literary interdependence amongst Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So what do people say? Well, some people say, no, these are all independent. They're just independent versions of the same story, and the same wording is just a coincidence. I think that's really hard to swallow that. Some people say option 2 is they are interdependent and they used each other for sources. And that's probably more likely. And then option 3, some people say there was a proto-gospel, an unknown version that they all copied from together. So those are sort of the three options. And so the basic principle when it comes to the synoptic problem is that the similarities can be accounted for on the basis of literary dependence. So there's a couple different views. All right. So option 1, this is the Augustinian view. He said Matthew wrote first, and the Gospels were basically written in the order that we find them in the canon. So Matthew, then Mark, then Luke. Mark abbreviated Matthew, or he says epitomized Matthew. And then Luke used both of those as sources. So this is a really popular view. Augustine, people thought about this view for centuries and centuries until about the 1800s. And this is consistent with what you preached about in Luke chapter 1. Luke says, I used other sources.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there's some merit to this view. Option 2.
A lot of people think that he used a lot of stuff from Mark.
Yeah.
So
option 2 is that there's some sort of proto-gospel. This is the theory that there was a gospel, but it's lost, and the synoptics used it, but this was kind of a first draft. Some people say that proto-gospel was like an earlier form of Matthew, that Matthew collected some sayings. They call it the logia, and that those sayings were written in Hebrew, and then Matthew made his gospel in Greek, and that became the final form of Matthew that we have. Mm-hmm. Some people say that proto-gospel was written by Mark, and maybe Matthew and Luke used it. The problem is sometimes Matthew and Luke agree against Mark, and the bigger problem is there's no reference to this proto-gospel. We don't have a copy.
Yeah.
None. It didn't withstand the test of time, if it did exist ever.
Yes.
All right. Option 3, we call the two-source hypothesis. This is Herman Weiss's theory. So this actually was somewhat of a watershed change here. This guy said, no, Mark wrote first. So this is called Markan priority. The Q thing, the Q box there comes from the German word Quell, which is the German word for source. So that Q document refers to material common to both Matthew and Luke, but excluded from Mark. So the Q thing, they say maybe it was like a collection of sayings, and we don't have Q anymore, but it did exist at one time. The problem with that view, go ahead and put that back up, Tim, for a second. So the problem with this view is Matthew was a disciple and an eyewitness, and you're saying that he was depending on Mark, who was not an eyewitness, which seems a little strange to people.
Yeah.
And, of course, we don't have Q.
Of course, Mark's source, most people agree, was Peter,
Yes.
who was an eyewitness.
Yeah, right. And then one more view. So this is the one that I find to be attractive. This is called the four-source hypothesis by Streeter. So this also has Mark in priority. And it has these two other documents called M and L. So M is a source that Mark used and had some Old Testament citations, and M is a source that Matthew used and had some other information like the birth narrative and some Old Testament citations. And then that L has some parables and the Mary stuff that we find in Luke 1 and 2.
Right.
And so L had another source for that. Luke did not have access to M. Matthew did not have access to L, and that explains why Matthew and Luke have some unique material. So this is a really popular view, and it's one that I find to be attractive. So those are some different ways to solve what we call the synoptic problem. Hopefully that was helpful in terms of explaining.
Really helpful. I mean, people, if you wanted some more information, you can. Pastor Dave's got some notes here. Maybe he'll share it with you.
Love to talk more, but that's probably good enough for like an appetite teasur. So what's the other background?
So the other thing, so the dating of Luke. So you kind of got it in there. So I kind of talked a little bit about the 60s, but there's a debate about this. So some people will kind of have different. There's two extremes. So some people will say Luke was written maybe the early 60s. Mm-hmm. Others will say he was written way later, like even into the 2nd century. And then some people will put him at an intermediate date of like 75 to 90. Now, the thing that I found interesting when going through this, the hinge and that kind of gets maybe what you think about this, is in 70 AD, that's when the destruction of Jerusalem was. And, in Matthew 24 and 25, and then Luke 21, I believe, we have something called the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus does talk about the destruction of the temple, the abomination of desolation, all of that. And indeed, in 70, the Romans came through and basically they destroyed the temple, they ravaged the city, and that was a major, major event that Jesus was pointing towards. Now, if Luke didn't write before 70 AD, he wrote after, it's interesting that there's no mention about this, So that's what some people kind of argue about, along with some other things. So I don't know. I sort of felt like it's the pre-70 AD thing makes sense to me, but I can understand why other people wanted to put it a little bit later. Either way, the argument is that Mark wrote first, and so he's drawing some stuff from Mark. So depending on where you date Mark, might also be where you're dating Luke.
Right. I mean, the higher critics are going to say there's no way Jesus could have known about the destruction of Jerusalem, and so Luke had to have seen these events in history, and he's the one who changes in the Olivet Discourse. Matthew says it's called the abomination of desolation. Luke changes it to when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies. And so people who don't believe the Bible has any sort of supernatural characteristic says there's no way Jesus knew that. There's no prophecy that's possible. They're bringing an a priori anti-supernatural bias to the gospel, and they're saying, Luke had to have known about this. That's why he wrote about it, and then retroactively put those prophetic words in Jesus' mouth. But here's the evangelical response, is that Luke gets to the end of the book of Acts, and he never mentions the destruction of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big deal. If I was Luke and I wanted to build the case for the fact that Jesus' prophecy came true, I would add that as the conclusion and say, well, just
this
like
happened.
Jesus said this was going to happen, this is what happened, the end, and the church marches on. But Luke doesn't do that. So he kind of ends ends the book of Acts like, well, Paul was in prison and the gospel continued to go forth unhindered, right? That's our unhindered studios. That's how Acts ends before the destruction of Jerusalem. So conservative scholars say, I think he finished this 2-volume work before that ever happened.
Yeah, and that seems to make sense to me.
I like it.
Yeah. So that's the dating issue. The other thing was you wanted to talk a little bit about the identity of Theophilus, which I got into a bit in the sermon. By the way, maybe we can mention some sources that we're finding helpful. I just want to mention this series, Zondervan Exegetical Series on the New Testament, has a lot of volumes. This one's by David Garland. I like this.
That's a doorstop, man.
It is. It is. So, when it comes to...
You don't need any dumbbells or anything. You just do your workouts with your commentaries.
You could. Over my head. Whoops. On a side note, when it comes to commentaries, there's a few different flavors. So you could get like a really thin one, and a lot of times people will write like... It's just giving you like the major stuff. If you get a commentary more like this, or Darrell Bock's got a 2-volume commentary.
Couldn't even fit it in one book.
He is turning it over every single nook and cranny of what's going on textually, historically. So, if you got some background with the Greek and everything, that may be something for you. I think this one is a good balance, this series, in that it gets into some Greek, gets into some theology, some application, and gives you some really good stuff. So Anyway, he talks a little bit about, and he mentions Streeter is the one who gives the theory that Theophilus was the secret name of Titus Flavius Clemens, who was a great nephew of Emperor Vespasian, who, along with his wife Domitilla, Vespasian's granddaughter, may have converted to Christianity. And so Theophilus is sort of a code name for them. He's higher up in society, and he's the one who's funding Luke's writing project to make it happen. So that's one theory.
The interesting thing about, if this is a proper name, in the beginning of Luke, he calls him Most Excellent Theophilus. In the beginning of Acts, he just calls him Theophilus. So some people surmise that perhaps he was experiencing persecution because of his new faith in Christ, and he lost his position of authority. He lost his title in between Luke and Acts because, in those decades, there was a lot of persecution of those who would follow Christ.
Right. And so let's assume that Luke was written in the 60s. That's when Nero was killing a lot of Christians.
It was a hot time.
Vespasian was one of Nero's generals, and when the destruction of Jerusalem happened in 70, Vespasian had become emperor. And one of his generals is the one who
Titus, right?
Yeah, Titus, who raged Jerusalem to the ground.
Nero was lighting the Christians on fire and using them as torches in his garden,
bringing them into their banquet halls and letting them be eaten by lions. I mean, this was things you can't even fathom were happening. So to be a Christian came with a great cost,
right?
At this time period.
Which, isn't that what you were saying in terms of like the argument that Luke is making with what he does in chapter 9? There's a very hinged section.
That was interesting. I hadn't thought about it as much until I was doing the study.
Right.
He says, listen.
This is all purposeful.
Yes.
Like this suffering, this persecution, it's not because this movement is off or wrong or not worth following. It's actually part of God's plan that the Messiah himself would set his face towards Jerusalem, pursue suffering, pursue persecution, and his followers, of course, will follow in like suit. And so Luke is making a case for the fact that these things are to be expected.
Yep, absolutely. All right, the last thing I want to mention was, so we talked a little bit about this 400 years of silence, the Intertestamental Period. And what's interesting to me, just kind of tying this together with Ezra and Nehemiah. So Ezra and Nehemiah come back. After exile, they rebuild the temple. They rebuild the city. There's some opposition to them building the wall. We talked about Sanballat and all his folks and the city being surrounded. And then there's this great celebration in Nehemiah 12. And then after that, no prophets, no scripture, no nothing until we get to Jesus. And during that 400 years of period, the Jews still encounter a lot of persecution. In fact, right now, they're celebrating Hanukkah. And Hanukkah, at least partially, is based in the books of Maccabees, which we don't accept as canonical, but there's some stories in there about some serious persecution that they undergo. Getting us back to the series we did on Daniel and the prophecies about Antiochus Epiphanes in Daniel 8. There's a really famous story in Maccabees, 4th Maccabees, I believe, talking about the torturing of these and murder of 7 sons while their mother is watching. So just imagine you're a mother who's watching. You have 7 sons. All of your sons are being brought before you and just tortured and killed in gruesome, gruesome ways. This was some pretty horrific stuff that happened around 164 to 167 BC. During these 400 years of silence, and not just that, but other things that are happening. So imagine, your people are walking through that. The stories are being passed down. If I went over to the Chabad, they have a whole history of what the Jewish people went through. I would be longing for Messiah to come too, and not having the King come would get you into this incredible anticipatory feeling, but maybe you're also feeling hopeless because you're wondering, when is the King coming? So I think that's an interesting piece of just all the pain and suffering and everything that they went through in that period before the angels burst on the scene in Luke 2 and then the birth of Jesus. So that I felt was a helpful setup for, as we get into Luke, just remember that's the context of what's happening.
Yeah, I've been studying for the next section, and it talks about the 400 years of silence. And as you may remember, in Luke chapter 1, there's John the Baptist's father, Zechariah, is a priest ministering at the temple, and he doesn't at first believe the message of Gabriel, so he gets struck with being mute and he's silent. And then at the end of Luke chapter 1, he speaks. And the point that this particular Bible scholar was making is Zechariah becomes, in a sense, a symbolic figure. That just as God himself is about to break the 400 years of silence, Zechariah is breaking his silence, and God is now bursting onto the scene with the good news of Christmas.
Wow.
Pretty interesting point.
That's deep, man. So anyway, it's going to be a great study on Luke. We're super excited about it. Any resources you wanted to mention? I mentioned this one. There's others.
Yeah, we're both using this tiny little book called Luke for You. It's 2 volumes by McKinley. And
that's a great applicational pastoral one if you want a shorter commentary.
Yeah, Darrell Bach has the 2-volume one. I'm going to be looking at Philip Ryken's Reformed Expository messages put together in that series. And
if you don't want the 2-volume series of Darrell Bach, he also wrote the Nivak in the InterVarsity Press one, which is much smaller. Right.
Yeah.
So
there's so much on Luke. I was just admiring a commentary at my father-in-law's house. It's Ironside has a great Luke commentary too. There's so many good things, but we hope that you're studying along with us. We're going to get so much out of this gospel, and we're looking forward to a great 7 months together.
All right. Well, Tim, we're at the end. Should we wrap up?
We are indeed.
Should we sprint?
Oh, we don't ever not sprint. Before we get
part of every workout, you got to push it at the very end. You got to push it hard, and then you feel good.
Oxygenate your blood, right?
Yeah. As Pastor Dave said last week, it is the highlight of the program. Yeah. Before I get into it, Pastor Bob mentioned I was in Denver, Colorado. I have to give a shout out to the reason I was there. Rush youth group and Millington guy Micah Parker, my brother, got married, so big congratulations to him and his wife
Micah.
Lauren. Yay, Micah! So he's a youth pastor out there right now, right?
He's got a massive youth group out there.
Wow.
They were all at the wedding. It was quite a cool looking group that he had.
Cool.
So
those mountain hippies he's got ministering to, very granola.
Something like that. So I'm trying to decide which one I want to give you guys, but I think I'll give you this one. So Pastor Robbie talked a little bit yesterday, and we talked about it a little bit already about the inner workings of the Gospel of Luke. So my question for you guys today is, how does the concept of divine inspiration align with Luke's explicit acknowledgement of relying on sources and careful investigation in crafting his gospel?
Yeah.
I actually did my master's thesis on this.
Oh,
so.
then I must submit.
Well, it's been a while since I read that thing. You need some good sleeping material.
I'm glad I picked this one
at the Dallas Seminary Library.
Well, whatever I could offer would pale in comparison.
I don't know about that. It's been a while. So, yeah, I was super interested in the term inspiration and what that means to be God-breathed, especially in light of the fact that the Bible is really clear that it has some literary dependence, and authors are using authors. The Bible sounds like the Bible. The Bible's quoting the Bible. And so there's something in the Bible called redaction, which is an editing process. So there's some additions, there's some subtractions, there's some replacements, there's some updating that has occurred. How does all that work together with our doctrine of biblical inspiration? What we have to believe is that God gave the Bible prophetic oversight. So when the canon was being developed, God, the book of 2 Peter says that God moved men along by the power of the Holy Spirit. He carried them along in order to produce the manuscripts, the words that we have, that the words are from God himself, but that does not eliminate the personality and the research of the human author. So the Bible is both a human book and it is a divine book. So it's human in the sense that it is written just like any other work was written. And so human vocabulary comes out, human personality comes out, human emphasis comes out. And sometimes, like in Luke chapter 1, human research comes out. This looks like a journalistic piece. This looks like an investigative journalistic piece. That Luke says, I researched this, I put it together for you, right? Seems like a very human endeavor, but we have to trust that behind the scenes that the Bible is not just a human book, it's also a divine book, and that God, the Holy Spirit, was moving Luke to record the words that he has for us to have today. And so it's both. It's human and it's divine. It's the hypostatic union of the Bible, so to speak, that we have both the divine nature and the human nature coming together as one.
Yeah,
How's
it was
that?
really cool.
Yeah.
Well, I would also say, you mentioned the Second Peter, right? They were carried
2 Peter.
along by the power of the Spirit, so the
Right.
Spirit's working in there. Also tempered with, First Timothy or Second Timothy,
Timothy, yeah.
2 Timothy 3, that all Scripture is God breathed. Literally, the Spirit of God is bringing it out. So I like that image of the hypostatic union with it there.
And just like we make mistakes with the person of Christ by emphasizing one nature over the other, we can make the same mistakes with the Bible.
Yeah.
So let's not decrease either the human side or the divine side. When we put both together, we have a correct doctrine
Right.
of the Bible.
Right. Well, and you mentioned the different authors too. So one of the things about Luke is that Luke has some of the best Greek in the whole New Testament.
Yep.
Which is actually one of the reasons some people think he wrote Hebrews too, although that's not, nobody knows for sure. But you compare that with like John, who has much
Simple.
Greek.
Yeah.
So there's different types of authors, different skill sets that God brings together, which is actually, the image of the body of Christ coming together, different gifts, that he's using them all to bring about his word, different experiences.
So, like you, Pastor Bob, have some literary skills and some writing skills compared to your friend here, Dave. Luke was very crafted,
Yes.
he knew how to put words together in written form. He was very skilled in that. I've heard the theory that Hebrews was a sermon preached by Paul and then translated into Greek from Hebrew originally, which is an interesting theory.
Yeah.
But Luke's Greek is par excellence.
Yeah, obviously we did Hebrews already. You have Luke, you had Paul, you had Apollos, different theories, or maybe even Priscilla. I think Priscilla was one of the ones, a woman writing it. Anyway, that's a different book.
Speaking of Luke, though, before we go off of this, so, some people question the authorship of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Of course, they're all anonymous, but church tradition says...
Luke is not cited as the author.
There's not like a title.
In the book.
No, but I have here written just to remind me that Justin Martyr, an early church father, mentions that Luke wrote the Gospel of Luke and that he was a physician and a traveling companion with Paul, who, of course, got his information from the first eyewitnesses. So Luke, if you're going to make up an author and say, this is who wrote that, why would you make up Luke? Why would you choose that? Why wouldn't you choose one of the 12 or one of the people who actually walked with Christ or had some firsthand? So it seems to me that common sense and church tradition put together, it makes sense that Luke actually was the author of this
People
gospel.
use that type of argumentation sometimes. It's like, why would you make this up? Why would he make up that women went to the tomb? Why would he make up other things?
Right.
Doesn't make much sense.
It would be actually counterproductive,
right,
to choose him as the author out of everybody. So I think it was Luke.
Gentile.
And Luke, and we're looking forward to this study together.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's enough for today. Hopefully you found this beneficial, and we hope to see you back next week on Behind the Pulpit as Pastor Dave is going to tell us about the rest of Luke chapter 1. God bless.
Take care.